Two, one, stand the fan, and looking on the screen, the Zoom screen, you see my friend Gary Stein there. Gary, how are you? How you and Julie and Casey holding up through the pandemic?
We're COVIDing in place, just like you guys are over there. And a really interesting time, Stanley. You know, this is the first time that we've been together really doing a broadcast of any sort in what, over a year now, I think.
I think it's been about 14 months. You were my co-host on Press Box, Inside Press Box for about 5 years, I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Because we did about 10 years of programs. But it's a pleasure. You and I are good friends off air anyway, but it's good to be sharing the microphone. And our main topic tonight is going to be about the NFL draft. But I did want to say, Gary, you've got that beard on, and I know the reason you have it on. You have another reason that you'll always remember this pandemic.
There's no doubt about it. And by the way, this is the last night of the beard. It's been 30 days. And the reason why it's been 30 days is because my dad passed away 30 days ago at the age of 101 years old. And in the Jewish religion, the Orthodox way, a son or a close relative is supposed to not shave for 30 days after the death of a loved one. So tonight marks the end of the 30 days. As you can see, there's a lot of gray in here, Stanley. But you know, my dad is, and we've talked about him quite often, was a great man who led a great life. And we're just so pleased to have had him for as long as we did.
Now, you had him for 101 years, but what's remarkable, and a lot of people, I do know this because we've talked about it, your dad was a concentration camp survivor, and he and your mom met in the concentration camp, and they courted, you told me, for all of about 15, 20 minutes before deciding to get married?
Yeah, exactly right. I guess it was the early advent of speed dating, as it were. Yeah, they, you know, after the war was over, the concentration camps really became holding camps.
Yeah.
Because the Allies really didn't know what to do with all these people. I mean, really, unfortunately. Anyway, so my dad knew somebody who knew somebody. He wanted to get married. And yeah, like you say, my mom and dad met each other in the camp. They dated for about 15 minutes. They got married. Eventually, they made it to the United States and had 4 children. And, you know, really, as they say, the rest is history. And thank God for what he did.
It's absolutely an incredible story. And I had an uncle, my Uncle Herb, Ron Match's dad, who now has been gone, I think, 6 years. But he lived to be 100. And your dad lived to be 101. Anyway,
amazing.
we've got the NFL draft tomorrow night. And I know where you wanted to start this off. You and I both read a very interesting piece by Richard Deitch of theathletic.com about this being the most complicated broadcast maybe in the history of sports because of the nature of how many remote locations. But I think you wanted to remind our viewers a little bit just about the days when the NFL draft wasn't even on TV.
Right. You know, after reading that article that you sent over, it got me to think. And Deitch did a great job about, you know, kind of telling us about all the technical things that are going to need to happen tomorrow night when the draft occurs. You know, how many different people and how many different places. And
yes, they're saying there's going to be 180 remote locations.
180.
That means each coach's house, each general manager's house, the players that they want to talk to, other media that they're going to come in and comment. It's really a big complicated broadcast.
Yeah, and for them to coordinate that really on 3 networks, Stan, it's going to be on ESPN, it's going to be on ABC with a separate broadcast, and it's also going to be on the NFL Network. So yeah, they have a lot to coordinate. But what I found interesting was as I was reading through the article and all the complicated things that were going to happen, it kind of reminded me back in the day of when the draft first got on TV. You know, a lot of people may not even realize that the draft never was on television.
Right.
It was always held in New York, and it was held in a room, in a ballroom, you know, somewhere on Fifth Avenue or 42nd Street or whatever, but it wasn't televised and it wasn't that big of a thing.
And it also wasn't held sort of like over a weekend or a night. It was held, you mentioned, and I think you were right, it started like Monday morning at 9 o'clock.
That's right.
It went like 2 days, though.
That's right. But what happened was it was kind of a perfect storm. It was in 1980. ESPN had been on for 1 year.
Right.
And were starved for programming and just looking for different things to do. And the president of ESPN Sports, Chet Simmons, who was a longtime producer and broadcaster, approached the then commissioner of the NFL, Pete Rozelle, and said, "Hey, Pete, what about doing the draft, televised on ESPN?" And Pete Rozelle was very skeptical. He was like, it's a draft.
Right, exactly.
Like nothing's going on that's newsworthy, necessarily compelling, But eventually he understood, as Pete Rozelle did, about the power of television, convinced the owners to do it, and then, as they say, the rest is history.
And Mel Kiper, of course, a local guy in Baltimore who learned at the teeth of some veteran guys that we know in town. One of the great draftniks is my friend Regis Burke. He studied the draft like nobody's business. He used to work with us. And he used to help produce the games on the radio and worked for the Baltimore Ravens upstairs in a lot of different capacities. But
so Stanley,
Kiper really, his star really rose the whole NFL draft.
Yeah, so interesting sideline on that. So Kiper's first broadcast was in 1984.
Okay.
That was 4 years after the draft started on television. Do you know where Kiper was on the day in 1980 when they televised the first draft?
I'm going to guess he might have been at the Colts offices.
He wasn't at the offices. He was at a party that the Colts were throwing at the Baltimore Convention Center for their fans.
And was he just there as a fan, or was he there as sort of a guy to talk to the crowd?
Well, actually, right. He was there as a fan, but also as a contributor. He had just started his he had just started his draft newsletter. That's really what it was a newsletter.
Yeah, it was a newsletter.
1 year earlier.
Yeah, that's a great story. Great story.
That's what happened.
Just to let people, to remind them, the draft will take place Thursday night from 8:00 p.m. till roughly midnight, maybe 12:15, just one round. Then on Friday night, it will start an hour earlier. It'll start at 7:00 and go up till probably midnight, but they will do the second and third round. And correct me if I'm wrong, Gary. First round, you got 10 minutes in between. You got 10 minutes to be on the clock. The second round, I think it goes to 5 minutes.
Right, and then after that, also 5.
And then Saturday, 12 noon, you'll be able to watch it on the channels that Gary mentioned, which are ESPN, NFL Network, and ABC Sports. But 12 o'clock to roughly about 7 o'clock, and they will have rounds 4, 5, 6, and 7.
It's going to be fascinating. Not only the broadcast of it, obviously that's going to be crazy this year, but also, there's not a lot really in sports that are going on. So I think there's been a lot of attention paid more so to the draft and to the players than really probably in the past.
Well, I wrote a piece today for PressBoxOnline.com that folks can grab, but I entitled it, and my headlines don't always make it past the editor, but my headline this time was "All Eyes Will Be on the NFL Draft." They were expecting roughly 700,000 people to come through the Las Vegas, at the hotel where these were going to be held at. Needless to say, there won't be anybody walking through other than cleaning crews or something like that. But I'm wondering if you feel like I do, Gary, that the fact that there hasn't been any major sporting events held since mid-March, that this is going to be really unique and will really have a massive audience come just to sort of touch base with sports again.
Yeah, I think it will. I don't know what the numbers were last year, but I do know, though, that since the NFL moved the draft around, remember, it used to always be in New York.
Yeah.
Now they move it around year to year. Last year it was in Nashville.
Right.
And it's really like a Super Bowl week style of event. That not only has the NFL drawn more and more people to the live event every year, but now more and more people are tuning in on TV to the draft.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised, even though it's not going to be live in a venue this year, I wouldn't be surprised just because of the sheer curiosity that people may have as to how it's going to look, that those numbers will continue to go up.
The Ravens, by the way, and we're not going to get into making many predictions on this thing, Gary. The Ravens have 9 picks. They have 1 compensatory pick, and they also have 3 picks that Eric DeCosta has made, picked up a second for Hayden Hurst from Atlanta. They also acquired a 4th-round pick from New England for Illuminor. What's his name? The offensive lineman?
Jermaine Illuminor.
Illuminor.
Trade with the Patriots.
And then we got an extra 5th-round pick. Actually, they've made 4 trades. A 5th-round pick where they picked up for Kyrie, the kicker, Kyrie Vivek. That's the 170th overall pick. And then the last pick will be in the 7th round, acquired for Alex Lewis. So Eric DeCosta is pretty active, a little bit more, I think, aggressive than his predecessor, Ozzie Newsome. Not that Newsome was shy about it, but I think Eric, being a little younger, might be a little bit more aggressive.
Well, I think what they're really excited about, Stan, and you're right, they do have the 9 picks, but they have 5 picks in the first 106. They've got the 1st rounder, 2 second rounders, and 2 third rounders. And so they have a lot of what they call dry powder or ammunition if they wanted to move up or down, really, in the draft, depending on how the board shakes out. They have a lot of ammunition with which to work because 5 out of the top 106 is pretty decent. And, you may see, if a receiver that they really covet, one of the top 5, falls anywhere to like 20 to 22, something like that, which is a possibility. They don't like to draft up necessarily because they don't want to sacrifice picks, but you may see that because they have so much available to them within the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the Ravens are well positioned, and with the way Eric has shown his aggressiveness, I think you could see them. I'm not looking for them to move up in the 1st round because they'd have to give up too much of the other ammunition. But I think especially maybe before round 3, they might move up 5 or 6 spots here or there, maybe even on round 2, move up to get the guy they like. And it could be that receiver, or it could be a linebacker. That gets us back to my opinion. I see Marshall Yonder retire. To me, that's the number 1 need this team has. Are you with me on that, or do you have differences of opinion?
I mean, I definitely see that as a big need. There's no doubt about it. You got a Hall of Famer, big hole now on the right side of your line. I just go back to the 2 playoff losses the last couple of years, the Chargers 2 years ago, and of course the Titans last year. And the biggest reason why the Ravens lost is because they couldn't stop the run. I mean, this team under Lamar Jackson particularly, their modus operandi is jump out to an early lead and force the other team to throw the ball. When that doesn't happen, and sometimes it happens against the good teams, the better teams, certainly against playoff teams, then the Ravens are in a sticky situation, and you saw that in the last 2 playoffs. So because of that, I think the biggest need is in the interior of the defense, the middle linebacker spot. They need a guy who can be tough against the run and set the edge. And so therefore, I think the Ravens are going to go linebacker if one of the 2 linebackers that they want is still there. If he's not and a lineman is there, then I agree with you, they'll probably take a lineman.
Okay. I think they're going to take care. And again, I'm not picking players, but our writer, Ken Zales, and Jeff Zreback of theathletic.com both think that guy could be the center out of Michigan, Ruiz.
Sidney Ruiz.
Yeah, so we'll see. But I'm still leaning toward they'll get the offensive lineman if he's there in round 1. I think they move right to linebacker after that. The other needs I see long-term, Gary, it's not a must-have, but I think in the 4th or 5th round, a safety might be coming as part of the overall haul here. Earl Thomas III comes in at 31 years of age, and if he kind of begins to lose it over the next year or 2, I think they want to have a little depth there.
Yeah, I think the depth is a good idea. Thomas is not going to be a Raven for 4 or 5 years, more than likely. Now, they did get good play from Chuck Clark last year, who came in and played very well safety. There's also some talk that Jimmy Smith may be converted to a safety because they have a lot of depth on the corners. So I think DaCosta and company are going to need to assess that situation and determine if they're going to reach for a safety that early.
Before we go, I wanted to ask you, Sal Palantonio, who I know you know a little bit like we did, because working for Ravens Radio years ago, we'd always run into Sal.
Yep.
He wrote a piece or in public that he's saying the Ravens are going to end up getting a running back. Do you think the what you just said about Earl Thomas, is that the case with Mark Ingram, that he's not going to be here 4 or 5 years? So might they want to get some depth, even though they've got Gus Edwards and Justice Hill? Might they, if the right player's there, might they jump on a running back?
I mean, how early? I mean, is he talking?
I'm saying maybe 3rd round or something.
All right. Yeah. I mean, maybe if they've already accomplished what they were looking to do, if the draft board played out the way that they hoped and they got that middle linebacker and they got that guard or tackle and they feel well fortified in those positions, yeah, I could see that because this is a run-heavy team. There's no doubt about it. The only thing that I would say, though, is this. If Lamar Jackson continues to be healthy and perform at a big level, I'm not sure that an upgrade in running back is necessarily makes the running game better. Much of the credit for the running game and the way that Ingram and Gus Edwards and everybody, Justice Hill late, were able to run was because of the confusion that Lamar Jackson gives to a defense. They're not able to stack the box. There are less people at the line. There's more for them to do. So I think the biggest part of the Ravens running game is Jackson.
Yeah.
So I don't know that they need to spend a high draft choice on a running back. I think a running back is almost a plug and play for the Ravens.
Good point. That I'll never forget that quote this year after we played the Rams, where Eric Weddle said that 50% of the time he didn't know who even had the ball.
Yeah.
And that was really telling.
Very frustrating for a defense. They just wear you down.
Hey, Gary, thank you for joining me on this. It's great to reconnect on Zoom after a 14-month hiatus on Inside Press Box.
Hey, it was awesome. This won't be the last time, Stanley. Thank you so much.
I don't think so either. Thanks very much, Gary. That's Gary Stein. I'm Stan the Fan. Pressbox, PressBoxOnline.com. Don't forget, Monday through Friday, every day, weekday, Glenn Clark, 10 to 12 on Facebook Live by going to facebook.com/PressBoxSports.